The asphalt of California State Route 466 shimmers under the relentless glare of the late afternoon sun, a mirage of heat distorting the horizon where the sky meets the desolate landscape of Chalame. It is September 30, 1955, a Friday that feels heavy with an unspoken tension, the kind of atmospheric pressure that precedes a violent storm. Yet the sky remains agonizingly clear. On this stretch of pavement, metal is about to scream against metal in a cacophony that will echo through decades, transcending the physical laws of a mere traffic collision to become a cornerstone of modern folklore. We are not merely witnessing a car crash, we are observing a ritualistic sacrifice at the altar of speed and youth. The vehicle in question, a Porsche 550 Spyder, sits low to the ground, a silver bullet designed for aerodynamics but destined for destruction. It is a machine built for the racetrack, stripped of creature comforts, a raw nerve ending of German engineering that demands total submission from its driver. But there is something else residing within the aluminum shell of chassis number 550-0055. Observers later would describe the wreckage not as inanimate debris, but as a wounded beast, snarling in twisted steel and shattered glass. When the impact occurs, it is sudden, brutal, and absolute. The silence that follows is not peaceful. It is the held breath of the world realizing that a god has fallen. The driver is broken, his life extinguished in a heartbeat. But the car is merely waking up. This was not a mechanical failure. This was not driver error. This was the first strike of a predatory entity that would go on to maim, crush, and kill long after its owner was buried. The curse of the little bastard had begun. James Dean was more than just an actor. By 1955, he was the architectural blueprint for teenage rebellion, a smoldering icon of angst who communicated more with a furrowed brow than most could with a soliloquy. He was on the precipice of a superstardom that few ever achieve, having just wrapped up filming Giant, and he possessed a hunger for life that was rivaled only by his obsession with velocity. Speed was his drug, his escape from the suffocating pressures of Hollywood, and the racetrack was his sanctuary. But in his quest for the ultimate thrill, Dean made a transaction that cost more than dollars. He invited a darkness into his life packaged in the sleek silver curves of a prototype Porsche. While the world mourned the loss of a cinematic genius, few paid attention to the wreckage being towed away from the intersection of Route 466 and 41. They should have. The tragedy of James Dean is not that he died young. It is that his death was merely the opening act for a vehicle that refused to die with him. The narrative we have been fed for decades suggests a simple accident. But the trail of blood left by the little bastard suggests a pattern of malevolent intent that defies logic. From the mechanics who lost limbs to the thieves who lost their lives trying to strip its parts, the car demonstrated a sentient desire to harm. Today, we are going to peel back the layers of myth to reveal the terrifying reality of the car that kills. But before we unlock this garage of horrors, I need to know where our investigation is reaching. Comment below which city you are watching this video from, so I know how far our story has traveled. The story of the curse does not begin with the crash. It begins with the acquisition, a moment that should have been celebratory, but was retrospectively steeped in ominous foreshadowing. In late September 1955, James Dean walked into Competition Motors in Hollywood, his eyes set on an upgrade. He had been driving a Porsche 356 Speedster, a capable car, but Dean wanted something visceral, something that blurred the line between a road car and a purebred racer. He found it in the Porsche 550 Spyder. It was a rare machine, one of only 90 produced, a featherweight aluminum shell wrapped around a complex four-cam engine. It was beautiful, dangerous, and incredibly fast. Dean traded in his Speedster and paid the difference, seemingly ecstatic with his new toy. He immediately took it to George Barris, the legendary customizer who would later create the Batmobile. Dean wanted the car to be unique, to carry his signature. He had the number 130 painted on the hood, the doors, and the rear deck. But the most defining detail was the nickname scripted across the back cowling, Little Bastard. This was the moniker given to Dean by his dialogue coach on the set of Giant, Bill Hickman, a friendly jab at Dean's relentless intensity. Dean adopted it with pride, branding the car with an identity that would soon become synonymous with death. The energy around the car was palpable from the start. It wasn't just a machine, it had a presence, a heavy aura that some sensitive individuals claimed to feel immediately. It was as if the car was waiting, impatient, vibrating with a frequency that unsettled those who looked too closely. The first documented instance of the curse, the first ripple in the pool of fate, occurred just 7 days before the catastrophe. It was September 23, 1955. Dean was beaming, driving his new silver Spyder around Los Angeles, eager to show it off to his friends and fellow actors. He pulled up to a restaurant where he spotted Sir Alec Guinness, the distinguished British actor who would later become immortalized as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Guinness was in town, feeling somewhat out of place in the glitz of Hollywood, and hadn't eaten yet. Dean, with his boyish charm and manic energy, invited Guinness to take a look at the car. He was proud, perhaps even arrogant, about the vehicle's capabilities. "Look at this," Dean said, gesturing to the low-slung Spyder. "She'll do 150. He offered Guinness a ride. Guinness, however, felt a sudden, inexplicable wave of revulsion wash over him. It wasn't just that the car looked dangerous, it felt wrong. The air around it seemed colder, the silver paint reflecting a distorted reality. Guinness, a man known for his composure, found himself gripped by a psychic terror he couldn't rationalize. He looked at the car, then looked at Dean, and the words that tumbled out of his mouth were not his own. They were a prophecy. "Please, never get in it," Guinness implored, his voice trembling slightly. "It is now 10 o'clock, Friday the 23rd of September, 1955. If you get in that car, you will be found dead in it by this time next week." It was a bizarre, chilling statement, incredibly specific and utterly out of character for the polite Brit. Dean, in his youthful invincibility, simply laughed it off. To him, it was just an old man's fear of speed, a superstition that held no weight against the roar of a Porsche engine. He dismissed the warning as nonsense, a funny anecdote to tell later. But the universe does not joke. What makes this encounter so terrifying is the precision of it. Guinness didn't just say, "Be careful." He gave a deadline. He marked the calendar of death. Why did he feel such an intense dread? Was it merely the look of the car, which was undeniably small and fragile compared to the heavy American steel of the 1950s? Or did Guinness, in that moment, tap into the dark current that was already swirling around the chassis 550-0055? Some theories suggest that objects can become vessels for negative energy, acting as magnets for calamity. If the little bastard was such an object, it had found the perfect pilot in James Dean, a man who lived on the edge, who courted danger, who had a death wish buried under layers of cool detachment. The car and the man were a perfect, fatal match. In the days following the encounter with Guinness, Dean continued to prepare the car for its maiden race in Salinas. He had the car checked by mechanics, tuned to perfection. Rolf Witherick, a German mechanic from the Porsche factory who had been assigned to competition motors, would accompany Dean. Witherick knew the car inside and out. He knew its temperaments, its capabilities, and its risks. He respected the machine. Dean, however, was treating it like a wild horse he intended to break. The dynamic between man and machine was shifting. Dean believed he was the master, unaware that he was quickly becoming the prey. As the week progressed, the atmosphere around Dean became frenetic. He was excited about the race in Salinas, viewing it as his liberation from the contractual shackles that had prevented him from racing during the filming of Giant. The studio had explicitly forbidden him from racing, fearing for their star's safety. Now that production was over, Dean was unleashed. He initially planned to tow the Porsche to Salinas on a trailer behind his Ford station wagon. This was the safe, logical choice. It would preserve the race car's engine and ensure it arrived in pristine condition. However, at the last minute, the plan changed. Witherich suggested that Dean drive the Porsche to Salinas instead. The reasoning was sound from a mechanical standpoint. The engine needed break-in miles to loosen up before the race. Dean needed to get a feel for the clutch, the steering, the way the car handled on real roads. It was a fatal decision, a pivot point where destiny locked into place. Had they towed the car, James Dean would have arrived in Salinas safely. He would have raced, perhaps won, perhaps lost, but he would have lived. Instead, the decision to drive the little bastard on the open road exposed him to the chaotic variables of public highways. It was as if the car itself had whispered the suggestion, demanding to be let off the leash, demanding to run. On the morning of September 30th, the day the prophecy was set to expire, Dean met with his father and uncle for breakfast. The mood was light. He was a young man going off to do what he loved. He then headed to Competition Motors to pick up Witherich and the car. They set off, a small convoy consisting of the Porsche and the Ford station wagon trailing behind with the trailer. The drive initially was uneventful, the California sun shining down on the silver bodywork. But as the miles accumulated, so did the speed. Dean was enjoying the car, pushing it, feeling the wind whip past the low windshield. He was stopped for speeding near Bakersfield at 3:30 p.m. The officer handed him a ticket, a final bureaucratic warning from the world of the living to slow down. Dean, annoyed but undeterred, signed the ticket and continued. He didn't know it, but the clock was ticking down the final hours of the week Guinness had warned him about. The little bastard was humming, its engine note a steady drone that masked the approaching violence. It is crucial to understand the psychology of the machine in this narrative. In the lore of cursed objects, the object often manipulates the owner's behavior. The sudden change of plans to drive instead of tow, the speeding ticket that failed to slow him down, the sheer euphoria Dean felt behind the wheel. Was this all natural, or was he being seduced into a trap? The road to Salinas was long and straight, a deceptively simple path. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the valley, the silver Porsche became harder to see against the gray asphalt. It became a ghost, blending into the twilight. Dean was wearing a white t-shirt and a red jacket, vibrant against the dull interior. But the car itself was camouflaged by the very element it sought to conquer, the road. As they approached the intersection of Route 466 and Route 41 near Chalame, a 1950 Ford Tudor coupe driven by Donald Turnipseed was approaching from the opposite direction. Turnipseed was a college student, an ordinary young man who was about to become an unwitting instrument of fate. He signaled a left turn, cutting across Dean's path. This is the moment where time dilates. Witherich in the passenger seat saw the Ford. Dean saw the Ford. "That guy's gotta stop," Dean reportedly said, his voice calm, confident in the rules of the road. "He'll see us." But Turnipseed didn't see the silver bullet. To him, the road was clear. The Porsche, low, fast, and silver, had become invisible. It was the little bastard's final trick. The collision was not a glancing blow. It was a catastrophic impact. The light Porsche slammed into the heavy Ford, the violence of the crash tearing the Spyder apart. Dean was pinned, his neck snapped, his body broken. Witherich was thrown clear, surviving with serious injuries but haunted for the rest of his life. Turnipseed walked away with barely a scratch. The prophecy of Alec Guinness had come true almost to the minute. It was Friday, it was late afternoon, and James Dean was dead in the car. But as the ambulance sirens wailed in the distance and the dust settled over the twisted wreckage, something became terrifyingly clear to those who would later handle the remains. James Dean was the first victim, but the little bastard was far from finished. The car was now a mangled heap of metal, but it had tasted blood, and like a shark in frenzy, it wanted more. The wreckage was dragged away to a garage, a silent, brooding pile of scrap that was about to unleash a wave of terror that defies explanation. Do you believe an object can hold a grudge? Because what happened next suggests that the little bastard wasn't just a car. It was a curse waiting to be spread, piece by jagged piece. The silence that descends upon a crash site after the ambulances have departed is a heavy, suffocating thing. It is a vacuum where violence once existed, replaced now by the cold reality of physics and loss. On that twilight evening in Chalame, the wreckage of the Porsche 550 Spyder lay like a discarded aluminum can, twisted into a grotesque sculpture of tragedy. It was no longer a vehicle. It was a crime scene, a tomb, and, as time would soon tell, a dormant predator waiting for its next opportunity to strike. The California Highway Patrol had done their job, measuring skid marks and taking statements, but they were merely documenting the physical evidence of a metaphysical event. The car, mangled and bloodstained, was towed to a local salvage yard, a temporary purgatory for a machine that had just claimed the life of the most promising star of his generation. But even in its ruined state, the car commanded attention. It wasn't just scrap metal, it was a relic. It was the physical manifestation of James Dean's sudden exit from the world, and in the macabre marketplace of Hollywood memorabilia, that made it valuable. This value would be the catalyst for the curse's expansion. Had the car been crushed into a cube and melted down immediately, perhaps the chain of sorrow would have ended there. But human greed and fascination with the morbid ensured that the little bastard would survive. George Barris, the legendary customizer who had originally personalized the car for Dean, was the first to step into the dark circle cast by the wreckage. Barris was a man who understood the soul of automobiles. He built machines that defined eras, from the Batmobile to the Munster coach. When he heard about the crash, he felt a proprietary connection to the vehicle. He had touched it, painted it, helped birth its identity. Now he saw an opportunity to reclaim it. Whether driven by sentimentality or the realization that the wreckage of James Dean's death car was a potential gold mine for a traveling safety exhibit, Barris purchased the totaled remains for $2,500. It was a significant sum in 1955 for a heap of twisted metal, but Barris wasn't buying a car, he was buying a legend. He arranged for the wreckage to be transported from the salvage yard in Chalame back to his shop in Hollywood. This journey, the return of the prodigal son in a casket of its own making, would mark the first strike of the curse against someone other than Dean. The car was no longer content with high-speed impacts. It was beginning to manipulate the environment around it, turning mundane logistical operations into life-threatening hazards. The transport truck arrived at Barris's garage, the grim cargo secured on the back. The atmosphere in the shop shifted the moment the truck pulled in. Mechanics, men who spent their lives covered in grease and surrounded by the noise of engines, fell silent. There is an instinctual human reaction to death. We can sense it on objects, a kind of psychic residue that warns us to stay away. The Porsche, crunched into an accordion of silver and red, radiated this warning. But the job had to be done. The car needed to be offloaded. As the workers began the process of loosening the chains and tilting the bed of the trailer, the air grew thick. It was a routine operation, one they had performed hundreds of times with cars far heavier and more cumbersome than the lightweight Spyder. But the little bastard was not subject to the normal rules of friction and gravity. As they began to slide the wreckage down the ramp, the car suddenly lurched. It wasn't a slow slide, it was a violent slip, as if the car had decided to jump. One of the mechanics, a man whose name has been lost to history but whose pain remains a documented fact, was standing near the rear of the ramp. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or perhaps he was exactly where the car wanted him to be. The wreckage broke free from its constraints. It didn't roll, it slid with the weight of a guillotine blade. The mechanic didn't have time to react. The car slammed off the trailer and landed directly on him. The sound of metal hitting concrete was punctuated by the sickening crunch of bone. The Porsche, which weighed only about 1,200 pounds when intact, seemed to possess a supernatural density in that moment. It crushed the mechanic's legs, shattering them instantly. Screams filled the garage, replacing the earlier silence. The other workers rushed to lift the cursed object off their colleague, struggling against the dead weight of the machine. When they finally pulled him free, the damage was catastrophic. His legs were broken, his career likely over, his life forever altered by a car that couldn't even start. This was the warning shot. The car had killed Dean on the highway, and now, stationary and broken, it had maimed a man in the safety of a garage. It was a clear message: do not touch me. But Barris, though shaken, did not heed the warning. He saw an accident, a slip of a gear, a failure of a chain. He did not see the malevolence. He stored the wreckage in his shop, covering it with a tarp, trying to hide the mangled visage of the machine. But you cannot hide a curse under a canvas sheet. It festers. It leaks out like battery acid, corroding everything it touches. I have to ask you, do you believe that objects can retain the trauma of the events they were involved in? Have you ever touched something and felt a sudden, inexplicable coldness? Tell me in the comments below. With the car in his possession, Barris faced a dilemma. The chassis was a total loss, twisted beyond repair. The bodywork was a disaster. However, the internal organs of the beast, the complex, high-revving four-cam engine in the transaxle, were miraculously intact. German engineering is resilient. The heart of the little bastard was still beating, waiting for a new body to inhabit. In the racing world, parts are currency. A Porsche Spyder engine was a rare and coveted item, capable of turning a lesser car into a champion. Barris decided to part the car out. It was a logical business decision, the automotive equivalent of organ donation. He would strip the valuable components and sell them to racers who were desperate for speed. He didn't realize he was essentially weaponizing the curse, breaking it into fragments and distributing it to unsuspecting victims. It was akin to selling vials of a plague to people who thought they were buying a cure. Enter Dr. Troy McHenry and Dr. William Eschgrid. These were not reckless teenagers. They were respected medical doctors who shared a passion for amateur sports car racing. They were men of science, men who dealt in logic, diagnosis, and facts. They saw the advertisement for the Porsche parts and saw an opportunity. McHenry, a Beverly Hills surgeon, owned a Porsche Spyder similar to Dean's, but lacked the specific high-performance edge he desired. He purchased the engine, the very engine that had propelled Dean to his death. Eschgrid, another physician, bought the drivetrain and transmission. They paid good money for these parts, believing they were acquiring the secret weapon that would put them on the podium. They installed these organs into their respective race cars, grafting the cursed tissue of the little bastard onto their own machines. The transplant was successful. The engines roared to life. The transmission shifted smoothly. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. But deep within the mechanical DNA of their cars, the code had been rewritten. The ghost in the machine had migrated. Barris also sold 2 of the tires to another young racer. This racer, whose name is often a footnote in the tragedy, strapped the tires onto his own vehicle. Tires are the only contact a car has with reality. They are the tether between the machine and the earth. If the tires fail, the contract with survival is voided. A week later, while driving, both tires blew out simultaneously. Not one, which is common, but both. The statistical probability of 2 tires exploding at the exact same moment on a straight road is infinitesimal. The car careened off the road, crashing into a ditch. The driver survived, but he was left shaken, his car a wreck. He returned to Barris, likely pale and trembling, telling him that the tires felt like they had a mind of their own, that the car had been wrestled off the road by an invisible hand. This was the 3rd strike. The mechanic, the tire buyer, and Dean. The pattern was establishing itself. But the most devastating manifestation of the curse was yet to come. The doctors, McHenry and Eschgrid, were preparing for the Pomona road races in October 1956. They had spent months tuning their cars, integrating the new parts, oblivious to the fact that they were preparing for their own funerals.
The Pomona road races were a major event. The atmosphere was electric with the smell of high-octane fuel and burning rubber. McHenry and Eskrid were there, their cars gleaming in the sun. McHenry's car, now powered by Dean's engine, sounded ferocious. It had the same raspy, metallic bark that had echoed off the hills of Chalame a year prior. Eskrid's car, utilizing the drivetrain, was equally formidable. As they lined up on the grid, there must have been a sense of pride. They were driving with the heart of a legend. But as the flag dropped and the car surged forward, the curse woke up from its slumber. It had been waiting for this moment. The heat of competition, the high speeds, the adrenaline. This was its natural habitat. The race began, and for a few laps, everything was normal. The cars were fast, the doctors were driving well. But then, the chaos began. It didn't happen with a mechanical failure in the traditional sense. It happened with a loss of control that defied the inputs of the drivers. In the middle of the race, Dr. William Eskrid, driving the car with the little bastard's drivetrain, entered a corner. He was an experienced driver. He knew the line. But as he turned the wheel, the car locked up. It didn't drift. It pitched violently. It was as if the transmission had seized or the wheels had decided to stop turning. The car flipped. It rolled over and over, a tumbling mass of metal and dust. Eskrid was battered inside the cockpit, the world spinning in a kaleidoscope of pain. The crash was horrific. Spectators gasped as the car came to a rest, a crumpled heap. Rescuers rushed to the scene, fearing the worst. Eskrid was pulled from the wreckage, alive but severely injured. He had survived, but he had paid the toll. The curse had taken its pound of flesh. But while the crowd was distracted by Eskrid's crash, the true horror was unfolding elsewhere on the track. The curse was capable of multitasking. Dr. Troy McHenry was tearing down the straightaway, the engine of the little bastard screaming behind his head. He was pushing hard, perhaps trying to make up time, perhaps feeling the unnatural surge of power that the engine provided. He approached a turn, but he never made it. Witnesses stated that the car didn't just lose traction, it looked like it was steered off the course. It shot off the track, plowing through a fence and slamming directly into the only tree in that section of the raceway. The impact was instantaneous and final. The tree, an immovable object, met the irresistible force of the cursed engine. McHenry died instantly. The steering wheel impaled him, the car wrapping itself around the trunk as if trying to embrace the destruction. In one afternoon, the little bastard had claimed a life and nearly taken another. 2 doctors, men of science, destroyed by the same vehicle that had killed James Dean, despite that vehicle being dismantled and separated by miles. The engine and the drivetrain had worked in concert to destroy their new hosts. The curse was not localized to the chassis. It was in every bolt, every piston, every gear. It was a contagion. As the news of McHenry's death and Eskrid's injury spread through the paddock, a chill went through the racing community. People began to whisper. They looked at the wreckage of McHenry's car and saw the shadow of James Dean. They realized that the little bastard wasn't dead. It was immortal and it was hungry. But the car wasn't done yet. George Barris still had the body, the shell of the beast, and he had a new plan for it, a plan that would put the curse within striking distance of thousands of innocent people. The wreckage was about to go on tour. With the blood of 2 doctors now staining the metaphysical ledger of the Porsche parts, one might assume that the sensible course of action would have been to destroy every remaining scrap of the vehicle. The engine was a killer, the drivetrain was a killer, and the tires were treacherous. Logic dictated that the shell, the battered aluminum skin that once held James Dean, should be melted down into ingots, its form erased from history to sever the connection to the tragedy. But the little bastard had become something more than a car. It was a celebrity in its own right, a grim totem of the price of fame and speed.
George Barris, the custodian of the wreckage, still possessed the crumpled chassis and bodywork. It was a hollowed-out husk, devoid of its mechanical organs, yet it retained a heavy, palpable energy. It sat in the corner of his shop, a constant reminder of the chaos it had spawned. Instead of destroying it, however, a decision was made that would expose the general public to the malevolence lurking within the metal. In a twist of irony that only fate could script, the California Highway Patrol, CHP, approached Barris. They wanted to use the wreckage of James Dean's car as a traveling safety exhibit. The logic was sound on the surface. Show teenagers the gory reality of speeding. Use the twisted metal as a scare tactic to encourage safe driving. It was intended to be a noble crusade to save lives. Instead, it became a traveling circus of disaster, a tour that spread the curse from the closed circuit of the racing world to the open roads of America. The little bastard was prepped for its tour. It was welded to a display stand, a cautionary trophy meant to be gawked at by high school students and fairgoers. But the car did not appreciate being put on display. It was a creature of motion, of violence, and being bolted down seemed to anger the entity inhabiting it. The first sign that this tour would be a catastrophe occurred before the car even left storage. The wreckage was being housed in a garage in Fresno, awaiting transport to its first venue. It was a standard facility, filled with other vehicles, tools, and equipment. One night, a fire broke out. The cause of the blaze remains a subject of debate. Some say faulty wiring, others suspect arson, but those who know the legend suspect a more supernatural origin. The fire was ferocious. It tore through the building with an unnatural hunger, consuming everything in its path. Tires melted into black pools of sludge, paint blistered and peeled, and steel beams warped under the intense heat. The garage was reduced to a smoldering ruin. Yet, when the firefighters finally extinguished the flames and sifted through the ashes, they found something that defied the laws of thermodynamics. In the center of the devastation, surrounded by the charred skeletons of other cars that had been completely destroyed, sat the little bastard. It was virtually untouched. The fire had raged around it, licking at its tires and scorching the floor beneath it, but the flames seemed to have recoiled from the wreckage itself. It was as if the car was surrounded by a force field of cold, negative energy that repelled the heat. The survival of the Porsche in an inferno that vaporized everything else was not a miracle. It was an omen. It was a statement of dominance. The car was saying, "Fire cannot kill me. I am the danger here." This incident should have been the final warning. It should have sent a chill down the spine of every official involved. But the allure of the exhibit was too strong. The wreckage was pulled from the ashes, dusted off, and the tour proceeded as planned. The car had survived the fire, but it was about to bring the fire to the people. I have to ask, have you ever heard of an object surviving a disaster that destroyed everything else? Do you think it's luck, or is there something protecting it? Let me know your theories in the comments. The tour began, and the little bastard was hauled from city to city, a macabre attraction that drew crowds wherever it went. People were fascinated by it. They wanted to touch the metal that had killed James Dean, to be close to the glamour of a fallen star. But the car was not a passive object. It was a trap. The first public incident occurred at a high school in Sacramento. The wreckage was set up in the auditorium, a stark reminder of mortality for the assembled teenagers. The display seemed secure, but as a group of students gathered around it, the bolts holding the display mysteriously snapped. There was no rust, no fatigue, just a sudden failure of the metal. The wreckage, which was supposed to be a static display, lurched forward. It fell off its stand, crashing down onto a 15-year-old student. The boy screamed as the twisted silver metal pinned him to the floor. The car broke his hip, crushing the bone with the weight of its history. It was a precise, cruel strike. The car, unable to drive, had found a way to attack. It had transformed potential energy into kinetic violence, targeting an innocent bystander who had nothing to do with racing or speed. The curse was escalating. It was no longer punishing those who sought speed. It was punishing those who simply looked at it. As the tour continued, the incidents became more frequent and more bizarre. The car seemed to carry a cloud of bad luck that infected everything in its orbit. At another exhibit, the wreckage fell off its display again, this time narrowly missing a group of onlookers, but shattering a plate glass window, sending shards of glass flying like shrapnel. It was as if the car was thrashing against its restraints, trying to break free. But the most terrifying aspect of the tour was the transport. Moving the little bastard from one location to another became a game of Russian roulette for the truck drivers assigned to the task. The roads, the very domain where Dean had died, became the stage for the car's continued vengeance. The most infamous of these transport incidents involved a driver named George Barkas. Barkas was a hauler, a man who made his living moving heavy loads across the vast American highway system. He was hired to transport the wreckage to a safety exhibit in Salinas, the very destination Dean never reached. The symbolism was potent. The car was finally going to Salinas, but it was arriving in a coffin of a trailer, and it was demanding a sacrifice for the journey.
Barkas was driving a flatbed truck, the Porsche secured to the back. As he navigated the highway, something went wrong. Witnesses described the truck suddenly swerving, as if the driver was fighting the steering wheel. There was no obstacle in the road, no blown tire, no mechanical failure of the truck itself. It simply lost control. The truck fishtailed, the momentum of the heavy load swinging it violently. Barkas lost the battle. The truck jackknifed and flipped, crashing into the shoulder of the road. The violence of the crash threw Barkas from the cab. He landed on the asphalt, dazed and injured, but alive. He had survived the initial impact. But the little bastard was not done. As the truck came to a rest, the chains holding the Porsche snapped. The wreckage of the Spyder, liberated from the flatbed, slid off the back of the truck. It didn't slide away from the driver, it slid directly toward him. In a horrifying repetition of the garage accident, the car landed on top of George Barkas. It crushed him instantly. The man who was hired to move the safety exhibit was killed by the exhibit itself. The car had claimed another life, adding a truck driver to the list that included a movie star and a doctor. This death sent shockwaves through the CHP and the organizers of the tour. The irony was suffocating. A display meant to prevent traffic fatalities had just caused one. The little bastard was a serial killer, using gravity and inertia as its weapons. Yet, astonishingly, the tour did not stop. The momentum of the bureaucracy was too great, the fascination with the car too profitable. They cleaned the blood off the wreckage, loaded it onto another truck, and sent it to the next destination. But the car was becoming harder to contain. Reports began to surface from people who came into contact with the wreckage during these transports. Mechanics complained of tools breaking in their hands when they worked near the car. Drivers reported feeling a sudden, overwhelming sense of doom when they looked in their rearview mirrors and saw the silver shape looming behind them. The car was exuding a miasma of negativity. It was a black hole of luck, sucking the good fortune out of the air and replacing it with disaster. There was an incident on a highway in Oregon where the truck transporting the car was involved in a massive pileup. The brakes on the transport vehicle failed, another mechanical anomaly associated with the curse. The truck plowed into a line of stopped cars. Miraculously, no one was killed in this specific incident, but the damage was extensive. The little bastard sat atop the trailer, undamaged amidst the chaos it had orchestrated, like a king surveying a battlefield. Even when the car wasn't killing, it was causing destruction. It fell off trailers multiple times, often on straight, dry roads with no explanation.
It was as if the car was trying to escape, trying to return to the wild, or perhaps it was just trying to cause as much mayhem as possible. The sheer number of accidents associated with the transport of the vehicle defies statistical probability. One accident is a tragedy, two is a coincidence, 3, 4, 5 accidents are a pattern that suggests intelligence. The car was behaving like a caged animal, lashing out at the bars, biting the hand that fed it.
By 1960, the little bastard had been on tour for nearly 5 years. It had traveled across the country, leaving a trail of broken bones, shattered glass, and corpses. The public was beginning to whisper about the curse. It was no longer an inside story among racers. It was becoming an urban legend. People were afraid to go near the exhibit. The safety message had been completely overshadowed by the fear of the object itself. The CHP, finally realizing that the car was a liability rather than an asset, decided it was time to end the tour. They had seen enough. The wreckage had burned down a garage, broken a student's hip, killed a truck driver, and caused countless other accidents. It was time to send the beast back to its cage. They arranged for the car to be shipped back to George Barris in Los Angeles. It was supposed to be the final Johnny, the end of the line. The car was loaded onto a truck in Miami, Florida for the long cross-country trek back to California. It was a journey of thousands of miles. The car was secured, the paperwork was signed, and the truck pulled away. The expectation was that the car would arrive in Los Angeles, be put into deep storage, and perhaps fade into history. But the little bastard had one final masterstroke of mystery left to play. It had demonstrated its power to kill, its power to maim, and its power to survive fire. Now, it was about to demonstrate its power to vanish. The truck drove from Florida to California. The driver made his stops, checked his load, and continued. The boxcar containing the wreckage was sealed. But when the truck arrived at Barris's shop in Los Angeles and the doors were opened, the world was greeted with a baffling void. The trailer was empty. The chains were there. The crate was there. But the Porsche 550 Spyder, the chassis, the bodywork, the tangled metal that had ended the life of James Dean, was gone. It had not fallen off. There were no reports of accidents, no broken seals, no signs of a robbery. It had simply ceased to exist in that space. The car that killed had become the car that disappeared. This disappearance is the climax of the physical manifestation of the curse. How does a wrecked car, a heap of scrap metal that cannot roll, cannot drive, and weighs over 1,000 pounds, vanish from a sealed truck in transit? Did someone steal it? If so, why has it never surfaced in over 60 years? The black market for such an artifact would be immense, yet not a single fender, not a single shard of silver paint has appeared. Or did the car, having fulfilled its quota of death, simply dematerialize? Did it slip into another dimension, a phantom highway where it continues to race? The disappearance of the little bastard is not just a mystery. It is the final act of defiance. It denied us the closure of seeing it destroyed. It denied us the ability to lock it away. It left us with a question mark carved into history. But while the body of the car vanished, the curse did not die. It merely changed form. The legacy of the car continued to haunt those who went looking for it, and the mystery of its location became a new kind of trap, luring treasure hunters into a search for a ghost. The disappearance of the little bastard in 1960 did not silence the curse. Rather, it transmuted the phenomenon from a physical threat into a psychological contagion. When the doors of that transport trailer swung open to reveal nothing but empty air and dusty chains, the car ceased to be merely a tragic artifact and ascended to the realm of modern mythology. It became the holy grail of automotive archaeology, a spectral prize that promised fortune to the finder and ruin to the keeper. For the next several decades, the trail ran cold, obscured by a fog of rumors, false leads, and the inevitable decay of memory. The car was everywhere and nowhere. It was rumored to be buried in a swamp in Florida, crushed into a cube in a New Jersey scrapyard, or hidden in the basement of a reclusive billionaire in Japan. Every whisper added a layer of sediment to the legend, burying the truth deeper under the weight of speculation. But the absence of the car created a vacuum that human curiosity was desperate to fill. The little bastard had become a phantom limb of Hollywood history, an ache that wouldn't go away, a story that refused to find its period. The mystery of its location became almost as compelling as the tragedy of its history. Why would someone steal a wrecked chassis? It had no functional value. It couldn't be driven. It was, for all intents and purposes, a piece of trash. Unless, of course, the thief understood the dark power it possessed, or perhaps was compelled by that power to hide it away, to act as the final jailer for a beast that couldn't be killed. For 45 years, the silence was punctuated only by the occasional crackpot theory or barroom tall tale. But in the early 21st century, the hunt was reignited with a ferocity that matched the car's violent nature. The catalyst for this renewed obsession was the Volo Auto Museum in Illinois. This institution, a cathedral of chrome and history run by the Grams family, recognized that the Porsche 550 Spyder was the ultimate missing piece of the puzzle. They didn't just want to find a car, they wanted to solve the greatest mystery in automotive history. They issued a challenge to the world, a bounty placed on the head of the mechanical fugitive. Initially, the reward was substantial, but as the years dragged on and the leads evaporated, the stakes were raised. Eventually, the museum offered $1 million for the recovery of the chassis. $1 million for a twisted heap of aluminum that had likely been rotting for half a century. The magnitude of the reward signaled the desperation of the search. It was a siren call that reached into the darkest corners of the country, inviting treasure hunters, psychics, and con artists to step into the light. The museum was inundated with calls. People claimed to have seen the car in barns, in lakes, in dreams. Most were easily dismissed, fantasies spun by people seeking attention or a quick payout. But amidst the noise, there were frequencies that resonated with a disturbing truth. Signals that suggested the car was still out there, waiting.
The search for the little bastard is not merely a treasure hunt, it is a study in obsession. Those who look for it often describe a feeling of being drawn to it, a magnetic pull that transcends the monetary reward. It is as if the car wants to be found, but only on its own terms. One of the most tangible pieces of evidence that the car had not been completely annihilated surfaced not as a body, but as a component. While the chassis vanished in 1960, the transaxle, the gearbox that sat between the rear wheels, had a separate journey. It was discovered decades later, having passed through various hands, and was eventually authenticated by Porsche historians. The serial numbers matched. This was the smoking gun. If the transaxle existed, sitting on a pallet in a restored state, then the rest of the car had to be somewhere. Matter does not simply cease to exist. The survival of the transaxle proved that the car had been dismantled, stripped, and scattered, but it also proved that the pieces were real, tangible, and recoverable. This discovery poured gasoline on the fire of the investigation. The hunters knew the prey was real. The ghost had left a footprint. Then came the lead that stopped everyone cold. It was 2005, the 50th anniversary of Dean's death, a year charged with memorial energy. A man approached the Volo Auto Museum with a story that was too detailed, too mundane, and too psychologically consistent to be a mere fabrication. He didn't come with the fanfare of a charlatan. He came with the quiet burden of a secret keeper. The man, whose identity has been protected to varying degrees over the years, but who is often referred to in the lore as Sean, claimed to know exactly where the car was. He didn't say it was in a swamp or a foreign country. He said it was in Bellingham, Washington. The story he told was a glimpse into a childhood trauma. He claimed that in 1960, when he was just a young boy of 6 years old, he had accompanied his father to a building in Whatcom County. His father, a man connected to the periphery of the automotive transport world, was there with other men. They were not there to fix a car. They were there to hide a body. Sean watched as the men took a crated wreckage, the silver, mangled remains of a Porsche, and placed it behind a false wall in a building. They then sealed the wall, plastering over the tomb, effectively erasing the car from the visual world.
The details Sean provided were chilling. He remembered the tension in the room, the hushed voices of the men, the sense that they were doing something illicit. He described the damage to the car, details that matched the police reports from 1955, the crushed driver's side, the specific way the aluminum that torn. He claimed that his father had sworn him to secrecy, a blood oath that a 6-year-old child takes to heart. For decades, he had carried this image, the silver beast lurking behind the drywall, a monster in the closet that was real. Why would they hide it? Was it a theft gone wrong? Did they realize after stealing the most famous car in the world that they couldn't sell it? Or did they feel the curse? Did they touch the metal and realize that the only way to be safe was to brick it up, like a radioactive isotope that needed to be contained? The psychological weight of Sean's testimony was immense. He wasn't asking for the money up front. He wanted the truth to be known. But in the world of high-stakes artifact recovery, words are wind. Proof is everything. The Volo Auto Museum, skeptical but intrigued by the specificity of the claim, demanded a test. They hooked Sean up to a polygraph machine. Lie detector tests are not infallible, but they measure physiological responses to stress, heart rate, blood pressure, conductivity. They measure the body's reaction to deceit. The questions were blunt. Did you see the car? Do you know where it is? Are you lying? Sean sat in the chair, the wires connecting him to the machine, and retold his story. He revisited the false wall, the dark room, the silver car. The needle on the polygraph scrawled its jagged lines across the paper. The result? He passed, with flying colors. According to the machine and the expert administering the test, Sean believed every word he was saying. He was not fabricating a lie for profit. He was reciting a memory. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. A past polygraph is not a treasure map, but it is a compelling endorsement of credibility. For the first time in nearly half a century, there was a legitimate X on the map. The little bastard was allegedly behind a wall in Washington state, sitting in the darkness, waiting to be exhumed. However, the location of the car is only half the battle. The other half is the labyrinth of law and ownership. The building where the car was allegedly hidden didn't belong to Sean. It belonged to a third party, unaware of the potential million-dollar artifact sitting within their walls. Or perhaps they were aware. The investigation hit a wall, not a literal one, but a legal one. Issues of property rights, statutes of limitations on theft, and the murky question of who actually owns the car after 60 years of disappearance began to muddy the waters. The car, technically, was stolen property from George Barris, or his estate. If it was found, who gets it? The finder? The building owner? The Barris family? The legal gridlock acted as a barrier as effective as the false wall itself. The museum and the investigators knew where to look, but they couldn't just take a sledgehammer to a private building based on a memory and a polygraph. The frustration was palpable. It was Tantalus reaching for the fruit, only to have the branch pull away. The car was right there, supposedly, just inches of plaster and wood away from the light of day. This standoff creates a terrifying possibility. If the car is indeed behind that wall, it has been there for over 60 years. It has been soaking in the darkness, festering. What happens to a cursed object when it is imprisoned? Does the energy dissipate or does it concentrate? Think of the pressure building up in a sealed container. If that wall is ever breached, if the little bastard is dragged out into the 21st century, will the curse resume where it left off? The car killed James Dean in 1955. It maimed and killed in the late 50s. It disappeared in 1960. If it returns now, will it be satisfied with its history, or will it seek to make up for lost time? The story of the hidden Porsche in Washington is the closest we have come to a resolution, yet it remains a cliffhanger. The building stands, the wall stands, and the secret remains sealed. But the universe has a way of shaking loose what is hidden. The polygraph proved that a witness saw it. The transaxle proved that parts survive. The logic dictates that the body is out there. But there is another layer to this mystery, one that goes beyond the location of the metal. It is the question of why the car has remained hidden for so long. Is it possible that the people who hid it didn't just hide it to conceal a theft? Is it possible they hid it to protect the world? Perhaps the men in that room in 1960 weren't thieves, but guardians. Perhaps they realized that as long as the little bastard was in circulation, people would die. By sealing it behind a wall, they were performing a binding ritual, locking the demon away in a tomb of drywall and timber. If that is the case, then the search for the car is not a treasure hunt. It is a reckless attempt to break a seal that should remain unbroken. We are like children playing with a Ouija board, asking for a presence we cannot control. The allure of the mystery blinds us to the danger of the answer. We want to see the car, we want to touch the legend, but we forget that the legend bites. As we stand today, the little bastard is officially still missing. The $1 million reward remains unclaimed. The file at the Volo Auto Museum remains open. But the silence from Washington is deafening. Did the building get demolished? Did someone quietly remove the car in the middle of the night? Or is it still there, right now as you listen to this, sitting in the dusty dark, the number 130 barely visible on its hood, the silver paint dull and gray? The thought is enough to keep you awake at night. A killer car, dormant, waiting for the sledgehammer to swing. But while the physical car is hidden, the curse has found other ways to manifest. It has leaked into pop culture, into the nightmares of collectors, and strangely, into the lives of those who own the few pieces of the car that were sold off. Because remember, the car was parted out. The engine, the transmission, the tires. We know what happened to the engine and the tires. But there are other pieces, smaller pieces, pieces that people keep on their mantles as souvenirs. And these fragments, these shards of the true cross of tragedy, have their own stories to tell. Stories that suggest you don't need the whole car to feel the curse. You just need a piece of it. Comment below. If you found the location of the car, would you break down the wall or would you leave it sealed forever? The hunt continues, a desperate grasp at a ghost. But while the chassis plays hide and seek in Washington, the scattered remains of the car that were sold off in the 1950s have been weaving their own tapestry of misfortune. You see, a curse is not limited to the whole, it lives in the parts. And there is one particular component, a piece of the Spyder that seemed insignificant, that has a story so chilling it makes the disappearance of the chassis look like a magic trick. We are about to track down the transaxle and the smaller artifacts and discover that the infection has spread far wider than anyone realized. The disintegration of the little bastard was not an end, but a proliferation. When a virus replicates, it breaks out of the host cell to infect others. And in the case of James Dean's Porsche, the host was the chassis and the virus was the malevolent energy bound to the metal. By the time the shell vanished into the mists of history in 1960, the internal organs of the beast had already been surgically removed and grafted into the automotive bloodstream of America. We often think of a car as a singular entity, but a car is a collection of thousands of parts. And if the entity haunting the machine is powerful enough, it does not need the whole to manifest. This chapter of the saga is perhaps the most unsettling because it moves the danger from the racetrack and the highway into the private homes and garages of ordinary people.
It suggests that you do not need to be driving at 150 miles per hour to be struck by the curse. You simply need to possess a stolen fragment, a shard of glass, or a piece of jagged aluminum that once vibrated with the dying breaths of a Hollywood icon. The curse became granular, microscopic, and infinitely more difficult to track. It transformed from a blunt instrument of death into a lingering, pervasive bad luck that rotted lives from the inside out. Before the chassis disappeared, while it was still sitting in George Barris's shop, it acted as a lure for the greedy and the disrespectful. There is a story, often whispered in the circles of hot rod lore, about a thief who broke into the Barris compound. This wasn't a professional heist. It was a crime of opportunity, driven by the desire to own a macabre souvenir. The thief, whose name has been erased by time, but whose fate remains a warning, targeted the steering wheel of the Spyder. The steering wheel is a potent symbol. It is the point of contact between man and machine, the circle that Dean held in his final moments. The thief, working in the shadows of the garage, attempted to pry the steering wheel off the column. It should have been a simple mechanical task, but the car, even in its broken state, had a defense mechanism. As the thief struggled with the wheel, his hand slipped, or perhaps the metal sheared with unnatural sharpness. He ripped his arm open on the jagged edge of the cockpit. The wound was not a simple scratch. It was a deep, gash-like laceration that severed tendons and arteries. The would-be thief fled the scene, leaving a trail of blood that mingled with the oil stains on the floor. He didn't get the steering wheel, but he got a scar that would ache every time the weather changed, a permanent reminder that the little bastard bites back. This incident reinforced the rule: the car demands respect, and it punishes theft with flesh.
But what of the parts that were legitimately sold? We have spoken of the engine and the transmission that killed the doctors, but there were other pieces. Smaller pieces. The little bastard was a celebrity corpse, and like medieval relics of saints, people wanted a piece of the true cross. Souvenir hunters who visited the crash site in Chalame in the weeks following the accident scoured the dry grass for scraps. They found pieces of the plastic windshield, shards of the turn signal lenses, nuts and bolts that had been sheared off in the violence of the impact. These items were taken home, placed on mantles, tucked into jewelry boxes, or displayed in cabinets. And almost without exception, the owners of these artifacts reported a sudden, sharp decline in their fortunes. It wasn't always death. Sometimes it was a slow erosion of happiness. Marriages crumbled, businesses failed, health deteriorated mysteriously. One woman who picked up a piece of the zinc bodywork reported that her house burned down shortly after bringing the fragment inside. Was it a coincidence? Perhaps. But when you overlay the map of these coincidences with the map of the Porsche's scattered remains, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. It is as if the pieces of the car act as beacons, broadcasting a frequency of discord into the lives of their owners. The most significant surviving component, however, is the transaxle. While the engine killed McHenry and the chassis vanished, the transaxle, the complex assembly of gears that transferred the engine's power to the wheels, survived. It is a dense, heavy piece of engineering, stamped with the serial number that links it irrevocably to Dean's car. For decades it was thought to be lost, just another piece of junk metal in the vast ecosystem of car parts. But it was out there, moving through the underground, passing from hand to hand. In the world of high-end Porsche collecting, provenance is everything, and this was the ultimate piece of provenance. It eventually surfaced in the possession of a collector who understood exactly what he had. The transaxle was authenticated. It was the real deal. But the atmosphere around this object is described by those who have seen it as heavy. It sits on a pallet or a stand, an inert lump of magnesium and steel, yet it commands a room. People hesitate to touch it. It represents the mechanical force that was propelling Dean when he died. It is the part that was spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute when the Ford turned in front of him. Does the kinetic energy of that crash still resonate in the gears? Does the trauma of the sudden stop live in the metal lattice? The current owners treat it with a reverence that borders on fear.
They know they are the custodians of a cursed object. They keep it safe, not just to preserve the value, but perhaps to keep it from hurting anyone else. The psychological weight of owning such a part cannot be overstated. Imagine having the transaxle of the car that killed James Dean in your living room. You look at it and you see the history, you see the tragedy. But you also invite the question, why do you want it? This desire to own a piece of death is a dark facet of human nature. We are drawn to the macabre. We want to be close to the fire, even if it burns us. The curse of the little bastard feeds on this obsession. It uses our curiosity as a vector for infection. The collectors who hunt these parts are playing a dangerous game. They are inviting a roommate into their lives that does not pay rent, but extracts a toll in peace of mind. There are stories of collectors who finally acquired a piece of the car only to sell it shortly after, claiming that the energy in their home had changed. They describe cold spots, unexplained noises, a sense of being watched. It sounds like the plot of a haunting movie, but these are rational people, mechanics, historians, who find themselves unnerved by a piece of metal. The car, even in pieces, retains a personality, and that personality is angry. There is also the story of the love bug connection. It is a strange footnote that George Barris, who owned the cursed wreckage, also built many famous TV cars. The curse of the Porsche seemed to bleed into the industry itself. The fascination with the car influenced the culture of customizers. But while Herbie the Love Bug was a car with a soul that loved, the little bastard was the dark mirror image, a car with a soul that hated. The duality is striking. We want to believe that machines can have personalities, that they can be loyal steeds. But if we accept that a car can be good, we must also accept the possibility that a car can be evil. The Porsche 550 Spyder was designed to be aggressive. It was designed to dominate. When James Dean died, that aggression had nowhere to go. It was trapped in the physical matter of the car. Breaking the car apart didn't dissipate the aggression, it just scattered the shrapnel. Each piece became a localized singularity of rage. As we move deeper into the 21st century, the value of these parts has skyrocketed. A verified piece of 550-005 is worth a fortune. This introduces a new element to the curse, greed. The potential for profit blinds people to the history. They see dollar signs where they should see danger signs. The transaxle, if it were to come up for public auction today, would fetch a price in the six figures, perhaps more. But who would bid? Who would raise their paddle to welcome the curse into their collection? The market for murderability is thriving, and the Porsche is the crown jewel. This commercialization of the tragedy might be what keeps the curse alive. As long as we value the car, as long as we talk about it, hunt for it, and pay for it, we are feeding the entity. We are giving it relevance. We are pouring energy into the myth, and in the world of the supernatural, energy is sustenance. The little bastard survives because we refuse to let it die. We keep resurrecting it in documentaries, in articles, and in auctions. We are the battery that powers the curse. Consider the lottery curse, where winners often find their lives ruined by the influx of money. The curse of the Porsche parts operates on a similar frequency. The acquisition of the part feels like a win. It feels like a triumph of the hunt. But the aftermath is a slow unraveling. The high of the purchase fades, replaced by the reality of the object's history. You can clean the grease off the transaxle, you can polish the aluminum, but you cannot scrub off the death. It is baked in. The molecular structure of the metal holds the memory of the impact. It holds the vibration of Dean's last scream. And when you bring that into your space, you are harmonizing with that frequency. It is a subtle poison, not always immediate, but always present. The scattered parts of the little bastard are like radioactive fallout. They have contaminated the landscape of automotive history, creating exclusion zones where only the brave or the foolish dare to tread. So where are all the pieces now? The transaxle is accounted for. The engine block is likely melted down or hidden in a private collection, its serial number filed off to hide its identity. The bodywork is missing, possibly behind a wall in Washington. But what about the smaller bits, the screws, the washers, the upholstery? They are out there. You might buy a box of vintage Porsche parts at a swap meet and unknowingly pick up a bolt from the little bastard. You might install it on your restoration project. And then, maybe your brakes fail. Maybe your engine catches fire. Maybe you just start having nightmares. The curse is anonymous now. It hides in plain sight. It is the ultimate sleeper agent. The terrifying reality is that the car has effectively achieved immortality by becoming part of the classic car world. It is everywhere. It is nowhere. It is a ghost story that you can hold in your hand. I have a question for you, the viewer. If you found a piece of James Dean's car at a garage sale, a verified, authentic piece, would you buy it? Would you bring it into your home? Or would you leave it right there on the table? Tell me your choice in the comments. The dispersion of the parts brings us to a chilling realization. The car is trying to reassemble itself. Not physically, perhaps, but metaphysically. The stories are converging. The interest is peaking. The parts are surfacing. It feels like a gathering storm. The energy is pooling together again. The disappearance of the chassis was the intermission, but the final act is approaching. We have tracked the car from the factory to the crash, from the crash to the garage, from the garage to the void. We have followed the organs as they killed doctors and maimed thieves. We have seen the curse infect the very air around the wreckage. But there is one final chapter to this story. There is a theory, a dark, compelling theory, that explains not just where the car is, but what it is. And it leads us to a conclusion that is more terrifying than any ghost story. It suggests that the little bastard was never just a car. It was a deal with the devil that came due. And the collection agent is still waiting. Here is the sixth and final chapter of the script. This chapter synthesizes the journey, explores the final theories regarding the supernatural nature of the car, and delivers a solemn warning about the consequences of unearthing the little bastard. We have traced the bloodline of the little bastard from the factory floor in Stuttgart to the desolate intersection of Route 466, through the garages of maimed mechanics, into the crushed bodies of race car drivers, and finally to the blank wall of a hidden room in Washington state. We have stood before the empty space in the transport truck and stared into the abyss where a tangible object defied the laws of physics to become a ghost. Now, at the end of this journey, we must confront the ultimate question that hangs over this narrative like a shroud. What is this thing? Is it merely a series of unfortunate coincidences, a statistical anomaly amplified by the echo chamber of Hollywood tragedy? Or is it something truly malevolent, a distinct entity that was born the moment James Dean signed the title? To dismiss the curse of the Porsche 550 Spyder as mere superstition is the comfortable choice. It allows us to sleep at night believing that the universe is random, chaotic, but ultimately neutral. It comforts us to think that metal is just metal, that an engine is just a collection of pistons and valves, and that bad luck is simply a roll of the dice. But the pattern we have uncovered, the eerie precision of the deaths, the preservation of the wreckage and fire while everything around it burned, the vanishing act that has baffled investigators for 60 years, suggests a universe that is not neutral, but predatory. The little bastard challenges our fundamental understanding of the relationship between man and object. It forces us to consider the terrifying possibility that we leave pieces of our souls in the things we love, and that sometimes those pieces can rot, turning the object into a vessel for a scream that never ends. Consider the timeline we have explored. Sir Alec Guinness's prophecy was not a vague horoscope, it was a time-stamped death warrant. By 10 p.m. next Friday. It happened exactly as predicted, almost to the minute. This suggests that the car was marked before Dean even fully possessed it, or perhaps Dean was marked the moment he laid eyes on the car. Some occult theories suggest that certain objects act as batteries for dark energy. They absorb the intent, the fear, and the adrenaline of their surroundings. A race car is the perfect vessel for such accumulation. It exists on the razor's edge of death. It is fed high-octane fuel and pushed to mechanical limits. It vibrates with the driver's anxiety, thrill, and singular focus. When James Dean died, his massive, explosive energy, the energy of a generational talent cut short in a millisecond of violence, didn't just evaporate into the California twilight. Physics tells us energy is neither created nor destroyed, it merely changes form. Where did that energy go? The most disturbing theory is that it transferred. It soaked into the aluminum pores of chassis number 550055. The car became a reliquary for the trauma of its own destruction. It became sentient with pain. This explains why it attacks. It is replaying the trauma of that September crash in an infinite loop, dragging anyone near it into the vortex of that specific moment in time. When the mechanic's legs were crushed, when the doctors crashed, when the garage burned, it was the car reenacting its own death, projecting its internal chaos onto the external world. The mystery of the little bastard has become a modern American myth, a dark reflection of the American dream. James Dean represented youth, rebellion, and the limitless potential of the future. The car represented speed, engineering, and freedom. Their collision was the violent end of innocence for the 1950s. But the afterlife of the car suggests that the story didn't end. It just went underground. The fact that the car is missing is the most crucial element of the curse's longevity. If the wreckage was sitting in a museum today, behind velvet ropes, safe and sterile, the power would likely fade. We could look at it, analyze it, photograph it, and in doing so, we would domesticate it. We would turn the monster into a specimen. But by disappearing, the car has achieved immortality. It exists in our minds, in our fears, and in the whispers of the wind on Route 466. The absence of the car creates a vacuum that we fill with our own anxieties. We have created a tulpa, a thought form sustained by 60 years of speculation. Every time a new article is written, every time a new video is made, every time a reward is increased, we are feeding the beast. We are keeping the little bastard alive. This brings us to the hunt. The Volo Auto Museum and the legions of treasure hunters scouring the Pacific Northwest are driven by the desire to solve the puzzle. They want the glory of finding the holy grail of automotive history. They imagine the press conference, the flashbulbs, the validation of pulling the tarp off the silver shape. But we must ask a question that few stop to consider. What happens if they actually find it? Let's imagine the scenario. A sledgehammer breaks through the false wall in Bellingham. The dust settles. There it is. The crumpled front end, the missing steering wheel, the faded 130 on the hood. The air in the room would change. You would be standing in the presence of a concentrated malice that has been fermenting in the dark for over half a century. Would the curse reactivate? Would the people who touch it fall ill? Would the truck that hauled it away crash? History suggests the answer is a resounding yes. The car has been dormant because it has been hidden. It has been in a medically induced coma of isolation. Waking it up is not archaeology, it is negligence. The people who supposedly hid it in 1960, if that story is true, may have been the unsung heroes of this saga. They may have been the wardens who realized that the prisoner could never be rehabilitated, that the only way to protect the world was to bury the radioactive isotope in a lead-lined tomb. If the car is found, it will inevitably be put on display. It will be monetized. Tickets will be sold. It will be transported on highways again. It will be surrounded by crowds. And if the pattern holds, people will get hurt. The little bastard is not a passive object. It is an active participant in its environment. Bringing it back into the world of the living would be like opening Pandora's box. But we already know exactly what plagues are inside. There is a hubris in the search, an arrogance that assumes we can handle the forces that destroyed James Dane. We look at the car as a pile of money, forgetting that it is a pile of blood. The transaxle that survives is a warning. It is a piece of the puzzle that carries a heavy energy, but it is just a piece. The body, the shell, the face of the car, that is where the identity resides, and that is what is missing. Perhaps it is missing for a reason. Perhaps the universe, in a rare act of mercy, decided that this object was too dangerous to be in circulation. The disappearance might not have been a crime. It might have been an intervention. James Dane and the Porsche are now one entity in the cultural consciousness. You cannot have the rebel without the cause of his death. The car is his final co-star, the villain that stole the scene and never gave it back. In a twisted, tragic way, the car gave Dean exactly what he wanted. He never grew old. He never made a bad movie. He never faded into obscurity or became a parody of himself. He was frozen in perfection, and the car was the cryogenic chamber that preserved him. But the price was exorbitant. The curse is the interest on that loan. It is the dark shadow cast by the bright light of his fame. The wreckage is the physical proof that you cannot cheat death without consequences. The legends of the little bastard serve as a modern Grimm's fairy tale, a warning against vanity, against speed, against the arrogance of thinking we can control the machines we build. We built the car to serve us, to carry us faster than our legs could take us. But in the case of chassis 550055, the servant became the executioner, and then it became the fugitive. There is a final theory that is the most unsettling of all. Some believe that the car is not hidden behind a wall, nor buried in a swamp, nor crushed in a yard. They believe that the car dematerialized because it had fulfilled its purpose. In folklore, cursed objects often vanish when their cycle of destruction is complete, or when they need to regenerate. If this is true, then looking for it is futile. But if it is physical, if it is out there, rotting in a barn, covered in pigeon droppings and old hay, then it is a time bomb. The rust is not decay, it is camouflage. The silence is not peace, it is patience. The car is waiting for the next James Dean. It is waiting for the next ambitious soul who thinks they can tame the machine. It is waiting for the light to hit its silver paint one more time so it can finish what it started on that Friday in 1955. The legend says the car kills. The history proves the car kills. The only thing that has stopped the killing is the disappearance. So, to the treasure hunters, the museums, and the fans who dream of finding the lost Porsche, I offer this warning. Be careful what you wish for. You are not looking for a pot of gold. You are looking for a loaded gun that has already gone off half a dozen times. The little bastard has earned its name. It has earned its rest. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some doors are meant to stay locked. Some walls are meant to stay sealed. If you are walking through an old barn or exploring a forgotten warehouse and you see a glint of silver under a dusty tarp, do not pull it back. Do not look for the number 130. Do not touch the metal. Turn around, walk away, and thank whatever God you pray to that you didn't wake the beast. Because James Dean is dead, but the car is just waiting for a jump start. The curse of the Porsche isn't just a story about a crash. It's a story about the things that survive the crash. And sometimes the things that survive are far worse than death itself. And now, I turn the final question over to you. Do you believe the little bastard is still out there, waiting to be found? Or do you think it has vanished from this earth for good? And if you found it, would you keep it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the unexplained, please subscribe and hit the bell icon. We have many more mysteries to uncover, and you won't want to miss what comes next.